The safe had been sitting at the back of Lot 7 since 6:30 in the morning, and by the time the auction started at 9, it had already been inspected, dismissed, and lightly mocked by most of the men who walked past it. It was a Mosler floor model, probably from the 1940s, painted institutional green at some point in its life, and now showing rust along the seam of the door and at the base, where it had sat on a concrete floor for long enough that the floor had claimed the bottom inch of it. The dial was frozen. The handle moved, but the door did not. Someone had scratched the word empty into the paint with what appeared to be a key. The letters were uneven, the E wider than the rest, as if whoever made them had started in frustration and finished out of obligation, and nobody could tell whether the word was accurate information or an optimistic rumor. They laughed when a 16-year-old named Deshaun Pruitt held up his number and bid $50 on it at an estate auction in Macon County, Alabama, on the second Saturday of April 2021. 40 minutes later, nobody in that room was laughing. This is the kind of story my father would tell. If yours did too, this channel is for you. Subscribe, and we'll keep telling them. The Macon County estate sales circuit runs on Saturdays, mostly, out of 2 or 3 auction houses that have been trading in the contents of cleared farms and old family homes for 30 and 40 years. Macon County is the county that contains Tuskegee, and Tuskegee is the city that contains the university that Booker T. Washington built, and where the Tuskegee Airmen trained, and where the history sits in the land the way it does in places that have been through more than one kind of American story. The county has about 18,000 people, and a main street that is making the particular effort that main streets in small Alabama cities make, which involves some new paint and some vacancy and an optimism that is real even when it has no immediate reason to be. The particular auction where this happened was held by Dempsey Brothers Estate Services, Gene Dempsey and his brother Carl, who had taken over from their father in 2001 and who ran a clean, well-organized sale out of a concrete block building on the edge of Tuskegee. Gene called the lots and Carl handled the floor. They had 2 part-time runners who moved items forward on carts and who could read a room well enough to slow down when something was heating up and speed through when it wasn't. The Dempsey brothers were known in the county for being fair, which in auction terms means they did not favor buyers they knew over buyers they didn't, and for being thorough, which means they researched what they could and described what they couldn't verify as what they couldn't verify, including the word unknown, which is a word that some auction houses avoid and Dempsey brothers used without embarrassment. The crowd that Saturday ran to about 60 people, mostly men, mostly past 50, mostly regulars, the kind of buyers who come to every Dempsey sale and know which rows to sit in and who to watch when the good lots come up. There were 3 dealers in the back who had driven up from Montgomery. There was a retired school teacher named Odell Cross who bought furniture and resold it through a shop his wife ran in Notasulga, and who was not going to buy the safe, and who examined it anyway because Odell Cross examined everything, on principle. There was a couple from Auburn who had come for a specific piece of depression glass that was in Lot 12, and who left after Lot 12 without incident. And there was Deshaun Pruitt, who was 16 years old, who had come alone, and who was sitting in the 3rd row with a bidder's number and $200 in his wallet that he had earned detailing cars in the parking lot of a church in Shorter, Alabama, on weekend mornings since the previous October. He was not the youngest person in the room. He was the youngest person in the room who had a bidder's number and a plan, which is a different thing. The safe came up as part of a mixed lot that Gene Dempsey split. He pulled the safe out as a separate item when it was clear the mixed lot would be confused by it. He described it accurately and without enthusiasm: Mosler floor safe, vintage, dial non-operational, door secured, contents unknown, sold as is. He said as is twice. He asked for an opening bid of $25. Nobody moved. He dropped to $15. A man in the back, Roy Fetzer, who bought scrap metal by the pound and resold it to a yard in Auburn, and who had the tolerant air of a man who knows exactly what he's doing and has no interest in explaining it, raised his card to $15, not because he wanted the safe, but because at $15 it was worth the scrap weight and the nuisance of hauling it. He had weighed the safe in his head during preview the same way he weighed everything, by eye, by experience, by a formula he had been running so long it happened before he was aware he was running it. Deshaun Pruitt raised his number to $50. The room took a moment to locate the source of the bid. Third row. Young. Gene Dempsey, who had called auctions for 23 years and had trained himself to keep his expression exactly the same whether a lot went for $8 or $8,000, kept his expression exactly the same. He acknowledged the bid. Carl Dempsey, on the floor, let his eyes track briefly to his brother. Not a signal, just the reflex of a man checking in. Roy Fetzer looked at the boy. He looked at the safe. He did the math that Roy Fetzer always did. Scrap weight, haul cost, yard price, margin. At $50, the margin was gone. He put his card down. He was not going to spend 60 seconds of thought on a bidding contest with a teenager over a Mosler that probably had nothing in it. The scratch on the paint said empty. Roy Fetzer believed the scratch. A man 2 rows back. Nobody at the sale knew his name. He had driven in from somewhere else and was not a regular. Raised to $55. This was not a serious bid. This was the kind of bid that happens when a room has decided it is mildly entertained and wants to participate in the entertainment without committing to anything. He raised his card the way a man raises a card when he expects to be outbid immediately and doesn't much mind. Deshaun raised to $75. He did it without hesitation and without looking around the room, which is a specific kind of body language that people who go to auctions regularly learn to read. Hesitation is where ceilings usually live. No hesitation means the ceiling is somewhere else, and the room can't see it. The room did not exactly laugh. It was quieter than a laugh and lasted longer, a murmur and a shifting and 2 or 3 low comments in the back rows that Gene Dempsey heard, and that he noted in the particular way that auction callers note things they will not react to, with precision and without expression. The collective sound was the sound of 60 people deciding, together, that what they were watching was mildly absurd. A boy with a bidder's number and $75 committed on a frozen, rusted safe that a man who bought scrap for a living had just walked away from. The man who had bid $55 did not go to $80. Nobody went to $80. Deshaun Pruitt bought the safe for $75. Gene Dempsey said sold and moved to the next lot, and the room's attention went elsewhere in the time it takes a room's attention to go elsewhere, which is not long. His father, Leonard Pruitt, had been buying at estate sales in central Alabama since Deshaun was 7 years old. Leonard ran a small resale operation out of a rented bay in a storage unit complex on the north edge of Tuskegee. Furniture, tools, household goods, the occasional piece of jewelry or silverware that he cleaned and priced and sold through a booth at a flea market in Tallahassee on the 3rd Sunday of most months. It was not a large operation. It was a consistent one, which Leonard valued more. He had taken Deshaun to sales from early on, because there was nowhere to leave him, and because Leonard believed, without making a formal lesson of it, that the way you learn a thing is to be in the room where the thing is happening for long enough that you stop thinking about it consciously and start seeing it. He had not taught Deshaun how to evaluate lots in any structured way. He had just narrated what he was doing, in a low voice, while he was doing it. He would pick something up and say, heavy for its size, which usually means quality. He would look at a piece of furniture and say, check the drawer slides before you get interested, because if the drawer slides are bad, the whole piece is telling you something. He would walk past something and say, "Too much wrong with it. Not worth the time to fix." And he had said, more than once in the years of going to sales together, a thing that Deshawn had filed away without fully understanding until he was standing in front of a rusted Mosler safe in Macon County. The one nobody wants is the one nobody looked at right. Everybody's seen the outside. Almost nobody's seen the inside. If you can get inside it, you know something the room doesn't. He had meant it generally. He meant it about safes specifically, as it turned out, because Leonard Pruitt had opened 3 safes he had bought at estate sales in the previous 8 years. He had found nothing in one, a bundle of old insurance documents in another, and in the third, a small Diebold box safe that he had bought for $30 at a sale in Tallapoosa County in 2017. He had found $1,800 in currency, 2 savings bonds from 1971 that had matured to a combined value of $440, and a class ring from Tuskegee Institute that had turned out to be 14-karat gold. He had not told many people about the Diebold box. He had told Deshawn in detail, including the part about how his hands were shaking when he got the door open in the storage bay afterward, and how he had sat down on a paint bucket and said nothing for about 3 minutes. Deshawn had not forgotten the story. He had been carrying it for 4 years, the way you carry a story that has an instruction buried inside it. He had spotted the Mosler at 6:50 in the morning, walking the preview, and he had done 2 things that most of the other 60 people in the room had not done. He had crouched down and looked at the base of the safe, and he had used the flat of his hand against the door near the hinge side, which is not where the lock is, and is where you can sometimes feel whether the internal mechanism has shifted with age. The door had give. Not much, but give. Which meant the lock was not the door's only problem, and might not be its main one. He spent 11 minutes on the preview for that one item. He came back to it twice, which is a thing that buyers do when they are working something out and do not want to make it obvious that they are working something out. The second time he crouched at the base and worked his thumbnail under the rust at the seam, not to test the rust but to read the seam, to understand whether the corrosion was surface only or whether it had moved into the metal. Surface only. The safe was dirty and frozen and worn. It was not structurally compromised. He had also done something that required access to his phone, and 20 minutes of his preview time, he had looked up the Mosler manufacturing records. Mosler's safe company had put locking codes for many of their commercial models in the lower left corner of the interior door panel, on a small metal plate, since the 1930s. The code was still valid for most standard Mosler dial combinations, and locksmiths who worked on vintage safes knew this. Deshawn had found a locksmith in Montgomery, a man named Ray Turnbow, who advertised vintage safe work on his website, and had texted him a photograph of the dial and the model number he'd found stamped on the back panel. Ray Turnbow had texted back in 11 minutes with a 3-number combination and a note that said try counterclockwise first. Deshawn had $75 of his $200 left when Gene Dempsey called the safe sold. Gene Dempsey and Carl arranged for the safe to be held in the back room while the rest of the sale ran. Deshawn did not leave. He sat in the 3rd row and watched lot after lot move through and did not display any particular expression, which Odell Cross, the retired schoolteacher, noticed and remarked on later. He said the boys sat there the way a person sits when they already know the ending and are just waiting for the story to catch up. At 12:40, after the last lot cleared, Gene Dempsey and 2 of the part-time runners helped Deshawn move the safe onto a dolly. He had arranged for his uncle, a man named Curtis Pruitt, who drove a pickup and did not ask many questions, to come by at 1 o'clock with a hand truck and some moving straps. Curtis was not there yet. While he waited, Deshawn tried the combination Ray Turnbow had sent. Counterclockwise first. 3 numbers. The second time through, something inside the safe moved. The door opened. There was no money. This is the part that the story might seem to require, and the part that didn't happen. There was no currency, no jewelry, no bonds. What was in the safe was a collection of personal documents, a deed to a property in Macon County dated 1948, 3 life insurance policies from the 1950s and 1960s, a bundle of letters tied with twine, and a small cardboard box that, when Deshawn carefully opened it, contained a set of military decorations, including a Bronze Star Medal with a certificate made out to a name he did not recognize. He stood there in the back room of Dempsey Brothers Estate Services for a moment. Carl Dempsey was nearby, moving something on a shelf. Deshawn said, "Do you know whose estate this came from?" Carl said yes and gave him the name of the family, a surviving granddaughter who lived in Auburn and who had handled the estate. Deshawn took photographs of everything. He did not remove anything from the safe. He called his father from the parking lot, standing next to a row of pickup trucks in the April heat, and described what he had found. Leonard Pruitt was quiet for a moment on the other end of the phone, the way a man is quiet when something has happened that he needs a few seconds to place correctly. Then he said, "You know what you've got to do." Deshawn said, "Yes, sir." He contacted the granddaughter through the auction house the following Monday. He returned the documents, the letters, and the Bronze Star in person, driving to Auburn with his father on a Wednesday afternoon. The granddaughter, a woman in her 60s named Beverly, who had not known the safe's contents and had sold the estate through Dempsey Brothers because she lived too far to manage it herself, sat at her kitchen table and looked at the Bronze Star certificate for a long time without speaking. She asked Deshawn what he had paid for the safe. He told her. She said she wanted to reimburse him. He said no thank you. He is not entirely sure why he said no thank you, and has said so. He just felt like that was the right answer. He kept the safe. It is in the storage bay his father rents on the north edge of Tuskegee, cleaned of its rust along the bottom, the door now opening smoothly on hinges that Leonard oiled 3 times before they moved the way they were supposed to. Deshawn uses it to store his own records, the receipts and notes from the sales he has been going to on his own since that April Saturday, the list of items he has bought and what he paid and what they sold for, which he tracks in a notebook he bought at a drugstore in Shorter for $2. 49. He is 17 now. He has been to 19 estate sales since the Dempsey sale. He has bought things at 14 of them. Tools, mostly, and the occasional piece of furniture, and twice some jewelry that he had appraised before pricing, because his father taught him never to guess at metal. His net for the year, after costs, was $1,840. He puts it in a savings account at a credit union in Tuskegee that his father helped him open in January of 2021, 3 months before the Dempsey sale, because Leonard Pruitt believed you opened the account before you needed it, not after. He has a reputation now in the small circuit of Macon County sales as a buyer who does his homework. Gene Dempsey has seen him at 2 subsequent sales. He has not said much to him directly, which is its own form of acknowledgement from a man who does not distribute acknowledgement casually. Roy Fetzer saw him at a sale in Notasulga in September and nodded at him across the lot, which Deshawn understood as meaning that Roy Fetzer had found out about the safe and had revised his opinion of the $75 bid and was not going to say so out loud, which is how Roy Fetzer handles most things. Leonard Pruitt goes to most of the sales with him, not all. Some Saturdays Deshawn goes on his own, which is how Leonard knows he's ready, not because he said so, but because Deshawn stopped asking if Leonard was coming and started calling afterward to say what he had found. The Mosler safe is in the storage bay on the north edge of Tuskegee. Door opening cleanly now, hinges oiled to the point of silence. Deshawn uses it to store his own records, the receipts and the notes and the running ledger and the $2. 49 notebook. His records go back to October of 2020, which is when he started, and they are organized by date and by item and by what he learned from each transaction, because Leonard had told him that the education in this business is in the record of what you got wrong, and you have to write it down to be able to read it. The Mosler is the first entry. It takes up most of a page. He wrote it out in full, the morning after, while the details were still exact: the dial, the door, the combination Ray Turnbow texted him, the weight of the bronze star in his hand, Beverly's face at the kitchen table in Auburn. He did not write down the comments from the back rows of the Dempsey sale. He did not need to. He knew what they were, and he knew what they were worth, which was less than $75. His father had a saying that he didn't repeat often, which is why it carried weight when he did. The room laughs at what it doesn't understand. Let it laugh. Understanding is the asset. The room is just the room. He meant it about auctions. He meant it about more than auctions. Deshawn Pruitt is 17 years old, and he already knows the difference, which means Leonard Pruitt did his job. The safe is open. The work continues.